Money. It's money. It's never not money. Glad we could clear that up, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, for real, let's get serious. Have you ever swallowed a bug? And I'm not talking about a gnat, or a little flying ant, or one of those fucking beetles that always show up in the summer to dry up and die. I'm talking about a horsefly, or a big moth, or a house spider that's twice the size as normal because a mosquito laid eggs in your leaking ceiling, its offspring providing so much sustenance to the arachnid, it now hunts centipedes for sport. Watching what's happened to the Lord of the Rings over the last few years has felt like swallowing a really big bug. You choke on it for a bit, to the point you're wondering if this is actually the stupid way you're going to die. But eventually, after gurgling its corpse in the back of your throat, you spit it up and look in disgust upon its mangled little bug body. A bug body that was once full of life, but is now full of being dead. The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, is not a good show. I should know because I tried to watch it, but after using the same 3-episode rule I use for anime, I decided to drop it. Because even though the goal was to laugh at it and make fun of how bad it was, it managed to circumvent such humor by being really, really boring. Yes, despite the culture war discourse surrounding this show for race-swapped elves and girl boss Galadriel, The Rings of Power's biggest sin is being about as entertaining as watching bread toast. Actually, no, I take that back. At least the bread in your toaster has the decency to go through change, unlike the repetitive conversations and static backdrops of the fantasy show. Something that I am told by brave souls who somehow stomached 2 full seasons of this slop out of sheer masochism never really changed. Sure, there were big, flashy battle scenes in a few episodes, but overall, the show maintained its juvenile writing and circular conversations that didn't go anywhere. Now, look, I can't really judge The Rings of Power as a whole fairly because I haven't seen the whole thing. But you see, I don't really care to. The responses it received are proof enough I was right not to waste my time with it. While many critics praised the show, a conspiracy theory I'm willing to restrain myself about for now, audiences weren't too happy. They gave it a low score on Rotten Tomatoes, a bunch of YouTubers managed to scaffold their careers off how bad the show was, and it makes sense considering how boring and lifeless the first few episodes were. But Amazon, in their infinite wisdom, decided to release a statement standing in solidarity with their cast because of the reception. But not because the show was getting rightfully criticized for being duller than dog shit. No, it was because of racism. Don't you love it when big studios make new entries in familiar properties racially diverse to rile up a small but loud subset of people whose responses they can use to label everyone who doesn't like the new product as a racist? Oh yeah, no, it definitely helps to alienate the people who are giving your show a chance and reviewing it honestly by pretending the people who don't like it are all evil. Although I have to say, in hindsight, the early damage control is hilarious, especially because there's no way of knowing if it contributed to the show's abysmal performance. Following the end of Season 1, a report came out revealing that, surprise, surprise, barely anyone who started watching the show was able to stomach finishing it. In both domestic and overseas markets, less than half the people who started the series were able to finish. Actually, it averages out to around 37%, meaning only about a third of people who watched episode 1 actually went through and watched the entire series. Now, sure, with something like a YouTube video, that's not that bad. Pretty decent-ish retention rate if you're able to entertain audience members for that long. But in streaming, that's the kind of shit that will get your show canceled. Netflix, for example, cans any show that doesn't reach a 50% retention rate after around 3 months. And this report came out in fucking April 2023, 6 months after Rings of Power Season 1 ended. Oh, but that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that The Rings of Power is the most expensive TV series ever made. The show had an estimated budget of $50 million per episode. Let's put that in perspective, shall we? Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy had a budget of $281 million. However, adjusted for inflation at the time Rings of Power Season 1 aired, that number increases to around $493 million. Jesus Christ, really? Holy shit, the economy is in bigger shambles than I thought. Regardless of this new mental crisis that will hover over the rest of this video, this means Rings of Power Season 1 cost roughly $100 million less than the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. Which doesn't sound too bad if you don't have the context. Because you see, Amazon, still sporting that 110 IQ, actually made a 5-season production commitment to the Tolkien estate when buying the rights to make the show, meaning that, despite the abysmal viewership retention rate, they have to keep going. And keep going they did, with Season 2 arriving in 2024. Honestly, I don't know much about this season, man. I hear it's better, or at least the stuff with Sauron is cool, but the damage had already been done. Critics loved it because talking in rooms all the time makes the show smarter, and audiences still reviled it. So much so that, lo and behold, they couldn't bear to hate watch it anymore. In a recent report from Luminate Data, it was revealed The Rings of Power Season 2 had a 60% drop-off in viewership compared to Season 1. This is measured within the show's first 12 weeks, meaning, yes, this was a very real, very substantial lack of viewership. In its first 3 months, Season 2, which has a similar budget to Season 1 by the way, only cracked about 3 billion minutes of viewership, which equates to around 50 million hours. Comparatively, this means Season 2 was around half as watched as Netflix's newest season of Bridgerton. Which is kind of fucking really bad for what's literally the most expensive show ever made. Now, Amazon is going through with making Season 3, apparently. It hasn't been officially greenlit like Season 2 was, but given their contractual commitment to finish the show, unless they want to fork over a ton of money for breaking the contract, actually, no, they should. Whatever financial penalties they'd be hit with, they're probably worth paying to retain their dignity, however much of it is left anyway. But The Rings of Power is just the most well-known example of a new piece of Middle-earth media that hasn't been very good, because the collective they have been making new Lord of the Rings stuff over the last few years in hopes something they create is going to be half-decent, all of which has fizzled out on liftoff before unceremoniously sinking into the ocean. Take, for instance, the Gollum game. Somebody at Daedalic Entertainment decided it would be a fantastic idea to make a game about Gollum looking for the One Ring between the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and you'd think it was the second coming of Christ, the level of advertisement that went into this game. Seriously, it felt like every big Game Awards show and gaming showcase for years was playing new trailers for this thing all the time. This was going to be the next big Middle-earth video game. It was going to be a grand adventure, full of action-packed things for Gollum to do, even though, he doesn't get the One Ring from Bilbo. That's like unbreakable canon. But no, don't think about how much purpose this game actually has. Please, just look at how epic it feels. And look, I won't beat around the bush, okay? The story of Gollum is a tragedy. Daedalic Entertainment, in ironic fashion, flew too close to the sun. The company was facing financial hardship during Gollum's development and were later bought by Nacon in 2022, about a year before the game was released. Fun fact, did you know 2.1% of Nacon is owned by BPI France, a public sector investment bank who's 50% owned by a French government agency of the same name? Is the French government partially responsible for what happened to Gollum? Well, I'd like to believe it. I'm not making any accusations. I'm on enough watch lists already. But what we do know is that, with a 2-year delay, monetary troubles, and an ownership handoff in the middle of production, Gollum's development was tumultuous to say the least. And that was reflected in its reception when it came out in 2023. Unlike Amazon, Daedalic did not have shills willing to put their reputations on the line to pretend what they made was good. The highest critical score Gollum managed to get was a 6 out of 10 from Shack News. Everything else was 3s and 4s across the board. Cited was everything from game-breaking glitches, terrible controls, and visuals that didn't reflect the big-budget AAA clothing the game had been wearing since it was announced. I like how one review says the second half of the game is better than the first, then goes on to reveal the first half took them 8 fucking hours to complete. Because that's what gamers really want, to be absolutely bored for a third of a day before getting to the part of the game where effort happened. The effects of this were felt pretty quickly, because just 1 month after Gollum was released, Daedalic shuttered their entire development studio. Yeah, that's gone now. They're only a publisher from here on in. Luckily, it didn't cost them too much in the way of money, with former employees revealing the budget was only about 15 million euros, or $15.5 million, which isn't much when trying to pretend your game is a AAA title. Also, workers were apparently forced to do unpaid overtime, and Daedalic's apology statement for how shit the game was may have been generated by ChatGPT. Very professional, can't understand how it all fell apart. Okay, so the TV and video games they've been trying to pump out about The Lord of the Rings haven't really worked out that well. But what about movies? Surely the medium that inspired Middle-earth's 21st century popularity is going to generate a hit. And what better way to revitalize its big screen presence than with anime? After all, that's popular with the kids these days. So surely having a pretty coat of paint will make the War of the Rohirrim a massive success. Technically an anime film, despite the English voice acting, The War of the Rohirrim tells the story of Rohan's Helm Hammerhand and the war between his people and the Dunlendings that led to the naming of Helm's Deep. You know, the one from the Two Towers movie. And I do mean movie, because The War of the Rohirrim specifically takes place hundreds of years before Jackson's movie adaptations. Miranda Otto even reprises her role as Eowyn, who acts as a narrator. And from what I understand, the film also reuses music and throws back to moments from those original films. Now, The War of the Rohirrim is a bit of a special case. You see, the movie, shockingly, wasn't made out of a love for Middle-earth. I know, with those last two I would have assumed everyone who was making these things loved Middle-earth. It was fast-tracked by New Line Cinema to ensure they didn't lose the rights to making movies based on Tolkien's work. So not really an artistic endeavor, nor something that's even based on the two big works, which they already adapted. Speaking of adapting, someone in America, because I refuse to believe the Japanese are this stupid, decided it would be a good idea if Helm Hammerhand was not the main character of the movie. Instead, the mantle of protagonist was passed on to his daughter, Hera, who goes unnamed in Tolkien's writing and does not have any role in the original story, aside from a failed arranged marriage with the Dunlending Lord Wulf. Here, however, she's not only billed as the main character and takes over as the lead, but she also completely usurps her brother Freylaf's role in the original story, despite him also appearing in the movie.
Fuck off.
Needless to say, this pissed off a lot of people, because, believe it or not, anime aesthetics aren't enough to get people to like a female character whose role is an affront to the source material. Yes, contrary to what people who pretend to like anime would have you believe, the aesthetics are only one small part of the whole package. It's really about the soul you can feel radiating off the characters, stories, and themes, presented in unique, interesting, and sometimes even off-putting ways. Well, to the normal cattle anyway. But even they could smell the bullshit wafting off this movie from eons away. Oh yeah, no, replacing Freylaf's arc to prop up what amounts to an original character is really gonna make this movie stand out. And boy did it, earning mixed reviews from critics and a whopping $20 million at the box office, which is less than its $30 million budget. You do the math. So that's 3 different tentpole Lord of the Rings projects that have come out over the last, 3 years? 3 years of absolute failure in trying to turn Tolkien's work into a successful franchise that goes beyond the source material. You'd think low viewership, box office flops, and an entire video game studio being gutted would teach anyone making Lord of the Rings garbage a lesson. That some things aren't meant to be franchised, and despite the swath of stories that could be adapted, nobody in Hollywood with any power is equipped to do it right. Seriously, the Silmarillion is right there. Just don't be fucking stupid and try and change shit. But this square-wheeled train is only just pulling out of the station, because Warner Bros., the fucking geniuses behind such hits as let's shit-can this movie that was probably going to make us money, Hogwarts Legacy 2 should be live service because that's been working wonders, and we miscalculated how much our TV brands are worth by $9 billion, are making even more Lord of the Rings movies. Live-action films that are part of the same universe as Jackson's trilogy and The Hobbit. The first of at least 2, titled The Hunt for Gollum, is expected in 2026. Of course, because Warner Bros. Has a tendency to stick their fingers in their ears and start scraping out brain chunks, they immediately decided to sabotage themselves. This is because The Hunt for Gollum is also the name of a really good fan film from 2009, adapting the same part of the books the theatrical movie will be pulling from, which is technically the appendices, I believe, but, you know. And what did Warner Bros. Do? They issued a copyright strike on the movie. Now, they quickly reversed course, claiming it was an accident. But come on, really? Their movie is clearly trying to ride the coattails of the fan film, and this was their shoddy attempt at becoming the only thing people can see when Googling stuff about the upcoming official product. Now, I said at the start of this video, the reason they keep making Lord of the Rings garbage is because of money. But, as our little journey has revealed, there really is no money to be made here. The Rings of Power was a flop that barely anyone wanted to see, Gollum killed an entire game studio, The War of the Rohirrim couldn't adhere to the lore and paid for it with a public execution, and The Hunt for Gollum is already starting off on a bad, money-grubbing foot. While that last one is just Warner Bros. Being themselves, the other 3 showcase how badly different facets of the entertainment industry want Tolkien's work to become a franchise. They want to tell stories at different time periods of Middle-earth, using a modern flair to attract as big an audience as possible to make money. But it's not fucking working, and given the TV and movies yet to come, it's clear they have no idea why. But I do, because I'm smarter than all of them. There are two important similarities between all three of these works that cause them to fail. The first of these is fan service. The Rings of Power contains familiar characters like Galadriel, Elrond, and Sauron in the center of the story. While it makes sense, given its placement in Middle-earth's Second Age, the show's focus on them is done in a way that evokes fan service, not to mention similar storylines for characters that are meant to feel like those from past installments. Oh wow, tall homeless wizard dude with not hobbits. Oh wow, Legolas except this time he's black and has no personality. Oh wow, this Halbrand guy is a secret heir to a kingdom and kind of looks like Viggo Mortensen. Oh wow, a contentious friendship between an elf and a dwarf. Actually, the stuff with Elrond and Durin were the only good parts of the show. But still, the same can be said for the other two as well, with Gollum literally starring the closest thing Middle-earth has to a mascot character, while War of the Rohirrim reused music and archetypes from the original trilogy. Fan service is neat and all, but if the original shit around your references is bad, then it just resonates as cheap. Fan service can be a neat decoration, but it can't be the foundation. That's like trying to build a livable home out of confetti. Sure, it'll look pretty, but it's not practical. The second and most egregious of these is that studios believe they can alter Middle-earth history to adapt these stories for modern audiences. And no, I'm not just talking about centering female characters or making Middle-earth racially diverse despite its clear old European inspiration. I'm talking about this incessant need for creators who adapt shit to put their own spin on things or dumb them down. The Rings of Power, aside from laying a blueprint for the Mario movie's Peach with Galadriel, contains plenty of fucking stupid fanfic ideas that are integral to the story. Take Celebrimbor, for instance. In Tolkien's work, he's a fearless, kind elf who was tragically manipulated by Sauron into creating the Rings of Power. He's often depicted as the defender of Eregion, even falling with it as a noble elven warrior. But here, he's some old guy in robes who just likes to twiddle away and make shit. Huh. Why is my gaydar going off? Not to mention Mithril, which went from being a metal with a really cool name to literally the only thing that can save the elves from being destroyed by Mordor aids or something. I don't know, maybe I fell asleep listening to the conversations that went nowhere. No doubt carefully crafted for everyone who plays on their phones while using their TV as background noise. There's also massive rights issues as well, with different studios owning different things, but that's partially in line with my next point, so let's put a pin in that for now. Okay, so my aimless neurotic rambling has given us plenty of information, I hope. These big studios want to milk The Lord of the Rings for all it's worth. The only problem is, the cow is male. But these studios have no idea what they're doing because they're trying to treat it like any other franchise. They think The Lord of the Rings can be like Star Wars. I'm not even paraphrasing here. In 2023, an insider told The Hollywood Reporter that Warner Bros. Wants to model future movies and TV shows in Middle-earth off of Star Wars' current model. You know, of being shit. Oh no, they mean release theatrical movies while making TV shows on Max. Right, of course, how silly of me. But the thing is, Star Wars started out as a movie series. You can, by extension, ignore a lot of Legends canon and go with your own thing, because, at the end of the day, it's not the source material. As hard as this is going to be to hear, Legends canon is replaceable, because that's not where the full lore of Star Wars originated from. But Middle-earth is different, because there is a canon that Tolkien crafted, long before the idea of blockbuster movie franchises was a thing. This canon is set in stone with a history that previous films have pulled from, but have also respected. Sure, you can argue the Hobbit trilogy took some liberties that weren't always in its best interest, but the important story beats of the original were there, while everything added wasn't a drastically damaging deviation from the lore. It's not like the movies took a central character in Middle-earth history and replaced him with his sister, or decided to spend an hour on a Gollum side quest in Smaug and Five Armies just to have him show up for fan service. These so-called creatives think they can twist and mold Tolkien's stories into their own thing, erase his name, add a couple new characters and concepts, and plaster their name all over it in crayon. But this isn't like Star Wars, where a movie trilogy is the origin point. This is a revered fantasy world that laid the foundation for a lot of modern fantasy fiction. We wouldn't have The Wheel of Time, or Dungeons & Dragons, or The Cosmere without The Lord of the Rings. It is foundational genre literature, and enough people know that and respect that enough to help bad products fail. But there is one problem. They aren't going to stop making Lord of the Rings garbage, and that's because these studios are running out of time. In 2034, the first edition of The Hobbit is going to become public domain in the United States. This means any Middle-earth concepts introduced in the first edition of the book are going to be free to use for any creative who wants to make something derivative. Kind of like how Disney can't sue anyone for making Steamboat Willie horror movies because the character's copyright has expired. While the original story was later rewritten to fit into the larger Middle-earth canon, ideas like Gandalf, the Hobbits, dwarves, the One Ring, and of course Gollum were present in the original. It's not that these big studios can't use them anymore once they hit public domain, but it does mean anyone can use them to create offshoots of their own, which means in the mid-2030s, we're probably getting a Bilbo slasher movie a la Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. But more importantly, the market will be saturated with fan works of all sorts, both trying to capitalize on the public domain and because of a genuine love for the book. They keep making Lord of the Rings garbage because of money, yes, but that's because they only have a limited amount of time to make it. Sure, they can keep pumping out theatrical releases and big-budget TV shows for decades, but they know the market is going to be oversaturated soon. They know the wave of monetizable fan works is coming, so they're trying to get ahead of the curve. What they still, somehow, haven't realized is that doing it for money is what's making everything flop. Make a simplistic TV show with a diverse cast anyone watching can relate to, with some references to the movie trilogy everyone knows. Watch it crash and burn because the writing wasn't good. Make a video game advertised as a AAA Gollum experience, basing it off the most recognizable character in the franchise. Watch it crash and burn because you didn't put the time and effort in to make it do anything other than look good. Make an animated movie about the history of Helm's Deep and create a pretty looking anime girl to lead it because that's popular now. Watch it crash and burn because the lore was right there, you fucking idiots. Make a live-action in-between-quel to Peter Jackson's Middle-earth movies and put Gollum's name in the title for character recognition. Can you predict what's gonna happen next? All of this awful Lord of the Rings shit reeks of desperation. This isn't about one studio trying to turn the franchise into a decades-long monolith, even if Warner Bros. Is pretending to have plans for it. This is about taking as much meat from the corpse as possible before it's buried for good. Do you really think Amazon is planning for the Rings of Power to still be running this time next decade? Fuck no, this needs to get done by 2032 before the public domain creates a slew of offshoot competition. Why did Warner Bros., with all their vast plans, decide to announce only one movie? Oh, they want it to be like Star Wars, sure. They want to drag Tolkien's work through as many rewrites and spin-offs and reboots as possible to pinch every penny. But they know their time is limited, because once the public domain train starts rolling, it doesn't stop. By 2051, The Lord of the Rings itself will be public domain in the US. A long way off for sure, but these studios are trying to get a head start, to make as much money as they possibly can from this IP before everyone can start profiting. Thankfully, The Lord of the Rings has a very strong base of dedicated fans who won't put up with vulture bullshit. The Rings of Power's viewership, Gollum's sales, and War of the Rohirrim's box office already show that. And while a live-action movie is more accessible to the masses, I really do hope it bombs in a spectacular fashion. I don't care who's coming back, I don't care who's involved. Everything in the 2020s has indicated to me that none of these studios care about telling stories in Middle-earth because they love the source material. They just want to use it to make money in the most boring, conventional, and tiresome ways in existence. What they should probably realize before the next box office bomb is that they need to fucking stop. Under their control, Lord of the Rings is never going to be a franchise, because they don't care about Lord of the Rings. They're not artists, they're charlatans. And if they're not going to treat Tolkien's work with respect when they adapt it, then they shouldn't be trusted to make anything with it at all. But that's not going to happen. Not when Amazon needs to save face and pretend the Rings of Power is a success to justify another 3 seasons. And when Warner Bros. Can't into functional business decisions. I mean, for fuck's sake, they're remaking Harry Potter on TV. Oh yeah, really looking forward to getting 8 snail-paced episodes every 2 years. The only solace in all of this is that it will end. When The Hobbit goes public domain, I guarantee you, Amazon is going to come out and finally admit the Rings of Power wasn't as successful as they touted. We're going to hear about how the public domain ruined plans for future Warner Bros. Lord of the Rings movies, or whatever bullshit they'll spew, to try and hide how abysmally they failed at trying to turn Middle-earth into the next MCU. How's Amazon's Lord of the Rings MMO going, by the way? About as well as Blue Protocol, I'd imagine. They are going to keep making this shit for money, in the vain hope that something, anything they do, is going to net them justification to keep churning out more. But you, yes, you, don't have to let this happen. And all you have to do to stop these awful Lord of the Rings movies and shows and games from being made is nothing. You don't need to do anything. The numbers speak for themselves. Don't watch The Rings of Power, don't play Gollum, don't buy War of the Rohirrim. Hell, you're probably already doing nothing already. Don't go see The Hunt for Gollum. Don't feed the franchisal beast, trying to turn everything into the next Avengers storyline. Don't give them a moment of your time, your energy, or your money. They'll keep trying to stitch Middle-earth into their own sordid creations. That much is true. But it's not going to last. Slop is not sustainable. But it's up to you, the consumer, to vote with your wallet and your time. Give them both to something else. Don't give in to hate watching or hate playing or whatever. It's all about money. So, don't give them yours, because all they'll give you is garbage in return.